What's going on, everybody? We are live and we are back. New York Sports Rehab. It's Mike Madden, a special edition of Andrew Golden today. You got the Golden Trio back talking some New York sports, specifically rounding up on this New York Jets season. I speak for all three of us when I say there's a lot to be said about the season, more negative than positive. There are some positives to touch on, which we'll get going with here shortly. Just to open things off, from the beginning of the season, all three of us going to the Monday night game at MetLife, Aaron Rodgers' debut, the scene that was before that, and then you fast forward, I guess, 4 months and 4 or 5 months, and this is where we stand. You couldn't have wrote a crazier story, I'd say, and just the things, the jet-like things that happen year after year. And of my 24 years, 20 years, we'll say, of being a Jets fan, this could take the cake as just the most New York Jets jet-like season. Jets are gonna jet. The typical Twitter T-shirts and the memes about just end the season. I think that fully encapsulates how we felt essentially since about week 7, week 8. We'll get into that as a whole. We've got about a number of topics we want to touch on today. Like I said, we got my brother Andrew, we got my dad in the middle. I think you guys are positioned like I'm positioned on my phone. I'm over here on the right, so we're gonna jump right into this thing. Dad, I'll go ahead pass to you. I know you got some opening statements you want to make.
Yeah, just an overall assessment of this season. I mean, to put it in one word, was disappointing. The expectations were so high. They did Hard Knocks and, all the hoopla with Aaron Rodgers coming to the team. And for several months, all we heard about were the great expectations and how we were going to be a Super Bowl team. And 4 plays in, it was basically all over. But it got me thinking, I go back a little longer, obviously, than you guys as a Jet fan. And I was thinking about where this season ranked in all-time disappointing seasons, not necessarily worst in terms of record goes or talent, but disappointing. So I came up with my trio of most Jet disappointing seasons in over my 50 years of being a fan. I went with number 3, the year after the Jets won the Super Bowl, the 69-70 season, which a lot of people forget. The Jets had a really good team that year. They went 10-4. They won their division. They were the favorites. They had the home field advantage in the playoffs at Chase Stadium against the Chiefs. They supposedly had this high-powered offense, and what they do, they laid an egg and lost to the Chiefs 13-6, who went on and beat the Vikings and won the Super Bowl that year. So you think about what could have been that day. And that was my first taste ever of disappointment, or, that Jet experience, or for that matter, just Jet Met, whatever team I root for experience. I'd never witnessed a game before that was so disappointing and the expectations so high. The Jets had numerous opportunities to tie that game up. They lost 13-6. They got inside the Kansas City 10-yard line in the third and fourth quarter 3 times, came away with no points on any of them. And so for me, number 3 was the season after the Super Bowl. A couple of things break right, go a little bit differently. We could be talking about back-to-back Super Bowls if the Jets win that game. Number 2 for me was the season after the Jets went to the AFC Championship game with Parcells as the coach. I believe it was 99. They had Denver halftime 10-0. They lose that game. They're everybody's Super Bowl favorite going into the 99 season. Parcells is back for his 3rd year. The talent is there across the board. What happens? Vinny ruptures his Achilles in the first game. Now, if that's not bad enough for you, the Jets actually, had they made the move to quarterback that they should have sooner, might have been a playoff team. Parcells insists on going with Rick Myra at quarterback. The Jets fall to 2-7, I think it was, before he finally makes the switch to Ray Lucas. And I know, Andrew, I think you're old enough to remember this season, maybe your first season of disappointment. But they switched to Ray Lucas finally. Jets go, I think, 6-1 or 7-1 the rest of the way, finish 8-8. And with all the accomplishments that Bill Parcells has had as a coach, he said his biggest regret was not going to Ray Lucas sooner in that game. One more win, they make the playoffs, and they were prime. They were that team that had everything going at that point except the quarterback. Do they win the Super Bowl? I don't know, but they definitely would have been a force to be reckoned with. Parcells as coach, the defense and offense around Lucas, that they would have been a formidable opponent in the playoffs. So that was disappointment number two. And number one takes us right now to the present. And I know, maybe if you ask me in 10 years from now, this is an open wound. So it feels like the most devastating. If Aaron Rodgers leads us to a Super Bowl in 2 years, this may not even make my top three. But right now it does, because of all the hoopla. And as good as Namath is, and as good as Testaverde was, you look at Aaron Rodgers, we've never had a quarterback like him. Even at age 40, Aaron Rodgers is arguably a top 5 all-time quarterback in the NFL. So getting him, and I think what makes the most devastating for me, the most disappointing, is this is year 13 of not making the playoffs. The Jets had won the Super Bowl prior in 68, so it didn't sting as much. They'd been to the AFC Championship game in 98, so it didn't sting as much. But after going 12 years without making the playoffs, coming into this one with a top 5 quarterback of all time, for it to go the way it does right now anyways, it's got to be my number one disappointment. And the icing on the cake for me is looking at all the other teams this year that had to utilize backup quarterbacks that are now currently playing in the playoffs with chances to go to the Super Bowl. Some of those teams, by the way, like the Browns, their offensive lines have been devastated as well. So looking at all these teams that made the playoffs anyways with a backup quarterback, mediocrity throughout the AFC, if the Jets were just halfway decent this year, not only would they have been able to make the playoffs, I was initially of the mindset that the Jets weren't a Super Bowl contender even with Rodgers, but looking how this division, how this conference went this year, I take that back now, because the Chiefs aren't the Chiefs. The Bengals weren't the Bengals. And if the Jets had just found somebody to play quarterback, or if they could have taken someone and groomed them into quarterback like the Bengals did with Browning and the Raiders did with O'Connell and so on and so forth, with any kind of just mediocrity, who knows how far we could have gone this year if we made the playoffs. So for me, summing it all up, number one disappointment of all time for me was this particular season. Till we succeed in the future, this is it for me.
Yeah. Andrew, your thoughts on the season?
If I had to describe the season in 2 words, I'd say emotional roller coaster. I mean, going into the season, you said it, at an all-time high in terms of the vibes, expectations at probably an all-time high, at least since the 2011 season. 4 plays in, everything goes down the drain. Walking into MetLife, September 11th, never felt the energy in a sporting event, the equivalent of that night. And it ended up being a win, ended up being a fun night. And I think that particular game, was really just a good kind of epitomized, what the rest of the season would be. And once again, that's emotional roller coaster. You look at the next 4, 5, 6 games the Jets played. They start, I think, 1-2, 1-3. Next thing you know, they've put 3 wins together. Can't remember the last time we saw 3 wins back to back to back. You're thinking, hey, this team might actually be on the rise, and hey, Zach Wilson might have actually turned his career around, and at the very least, we might be able to sneak into the playoffs as a wild card. Fast forward a couple weeks, and it was pretty clear. I would say probably after the Raiders game that the season was basically down the drain. We weren't going to accomplish anything, and quite frankly, at that point, at least for me, while I was interested on a week-to-week basis, I kind of lost that feeling of just, this is our year that we could surprise people, and lost all sense of optimism. I will say, Dad, you are right. It's funny that I think you said your number 2 or 3 disappointing season that year where Testaverde got hurt. That was definitely the first season that I actually truly remember watching. Is my first season of Jets fandom, I'll call it. First game, however, that I remember watching ever was that AFC Championship against the Broncos at Brian Powell's house in New Jersey, or in Burlington. I don't know if you remember that. And so still sticks out in my mind today. And yeah, if I had to summarize the season, put it in a nutshell, I would definitely say emotional roller coaster, disappointment, and quite frankly, kind of has me questioning the entire organization top to bottom, coaching staff, obviously the front office, and even some of the players that I was kind of hoping that we'd be able to count on for years to come, players that we just signed like Alan Lazard, and so on. So we'll see. Not exactly the most encouraging of seasons. Hopeful that Rodgers can hopefully single-handedly help turn this ship around. But as a Jets fan, we all know it's never easy.
Yeah, never easy at all. And, the one word I'll use to describe this season is failure. It was a failure. It was there for the taking with or without Rodgers. I think the thing that rubs me the wrong way the most, and this has kind of been building for a month or so, we can call it, maybe even 6 to 8 weeks, is kind of the slap on the wrist that the organization is getting for this, all because of Aaron Rodgers going down. Dad made a great point. You look at the AFC from top to bottom, Baltimore being a number 1 seed. They're a complete football team, but I think when you look back at the scope of things, probably over the last 5 to 7 years, the top of the AFC, when you look at Baltimore, when you look at Buffalo, when you look at Kansas City, this is the weakest that the AFC's been in a long time. And all we've heard all year since the offseason was how stacked and how loaded this AFC run was going to be. And that kind of negated the expectations of, well, we should be a lot better with Rodgers, but it's still going to be tough to win. No, this was the year. This was it for the taking. Josh Allen and the Bills essentially stumbled into a number 2 seed. You talk about guys like Joe Flacco, Jake Browning, Mason Rudolph. These are all quarterbacks that are in the playoffs, that in 3 to 4 days are getting ready to play the biggest game of their life. And guess what? All these teams I just named, the defenses aren't as good as the Jets. The special teams units didn't perform as good as the Jets. From an offensive side of the ball, it's the worst I've ever seen. I have a hard time thinking we'll see worse again, whether it's the Jets or another team. It was complete failure. You have guys on this team, young talent, that in 2 to 3 years are going to be expecting big money, big contracts, or they're going to be moving elsewhere. You talk about a guy like Bryce Huff. You can't even celebrate a guy like Bryce Huff having a double-digit sack season because the season was so abysmal. He's probably going to want to go get a bag anywhere else. And now we're left with another position. A great season from an edge rusher. How long have we been sitting here? Oh, where's the pass rush? Where's the pass rush? Well, it turns out the 1 year we finally established a pass rush and a defense that's worth anything, we have the worst offensive performance of all time over a stretch of a full season. So an absolute failure. The slap on the wrist because of Rodgers going down is an indictment to this organization and how they view winning. I'd say out of the 3 of us, I've been the kind of blind optimist, whether it goes back to this season or seasons in the past. Every time the offseason goes by and week 1 rolls around, I had this blind optimism that this year might be the year. And obviously the expectations were high for a reason. You got Aaron Rodgers, you got Nathaniel Hackett, you've got a relationship. You've got Garrett Wilson, offensive rookie of the year, going into his second year. Breece Hall coming off the ACL. This is the lesson I learned, is when it comes to the New York Jets, do not set expectations, because anything that can happen will happen. I believe that's considered Murphy's Law, or whatever the saying is. That is perfect for the New York Jets. And like I said, it's a failure. We'll get into some other things as we go on. You said it best, Andrew. You kind of hard to be excited. Like this season, not only was an ultimate failure, it's really left a bad taste in my mouth. I'm going to continue to support this organization. I'm going to continue to support this team, almost because I have no choice. My body's going to choose to do it either way. But with Robert Saleh, Nathaniel Hackett, Joe Douglas at the helm, I'm really lacking confidence. It's at an all-time low for this regime because, like I said, it was there for the taking, despite Rodgers going down. Good organizations, teams, and coaches that are prepared for the worst, prepared for scenarios like the Bengals, like the Browns, like the Steelers. This doesn't happen. And for the New York Jets, it's very clear that there are levels to where these organizations stand. And it's becoming clearer and clearer by the year that we're just lacking the ineptitude to make the positive decisions to get winning results, to get successful results. So we'll get into more of kind of the player to player, even coach to coach, a review. But that's my overall. It was a failure. It was a failure.
Right. Yeah, getting into the players a little bit, I thought we would go ahead first and give our 3 most disappointing players and then our 3 most positive in terms of surprise. Not necessarily the best players on the team, but guys who came out of nowhere and produced more than you expected. So I'll start with my top 3 disappointments. I would say number 3, I'm going to go with Carl Lawson. Again, think about where this guy was when we signed him, and I realize he got hurt that first year, but this guy still right now should be in the peak of his prime. And really, he's never given us anything. I think some of it's got to do with the coaching and him being phased out. But I still got, when you look at the expectations that Carl Lawson was supposed to bring this team, he was viewed as the next John Abraham, and that didn't turn out to be the case. And the last 2 years, you got to assume that he was relatively healthy, and he gave you nothing to the point where he was either a healthy scratch or just didn't get in the game. So 3, I go with Carl Lawson. 2, I've got to go, and this might be a surprise, I got to go with Laken Tomlinson. And the reason why I don't have him 1 is because he's played it. Since when, though, do we give rewards for guys that play every game? The Jets have been so bad, especially in the line. We revere him because he played in every game. Yep. But other than playing in every game, he's been pretty awful. And again, the expectation, this guy was a Pro Bowl guard the season before we got him. He was supposed to be the stabilizer. We were really excited about bringing this guy in. And even with all the injuries, if Laken Tomlinson was playing at the level close to that he's supposed to, he solidifies the middle of that a lot. And he's graded out as poorly as the guys that are off the street coming in and playing their first game. So I go with Laken Tomlinson too, only because he's played in every game, do I not make him number 1. And then number 1, again, I guess the expectation wasn't as high because he's not a former Pro Bowler, but his poor play, it really just resonated across the offense, and that's got to be Allen Lazard. You know, I think the Jets overhyped this guy or overevaluated him, and that was one of the reasons why they didn't bring in a replacement when Corey Davis retired, because I think they had a higher regard of Lazard than he actually was. I think that's one of the reasons why they got rid of McCole Hardman, and they viewed this guy as a legitimate 1A, 1B receiver with Garrett Wilson. He's been nothing like that, to the point where he couldn't even get on the field anymore. And misutilization by the Jets as well. First half of the season, they're force-feeding this guy everything, and he's dropping everything. And the second half of the season, they give up on him completely. So I thought not having that number 2 receiver impacted the entire offense, really hurt Garrett Wilson to the point where probably he's ready to get out of here now. So even though Lazard wasn't viewed as a Pro Bowl type player, he had pretty good numbers. He was Aaron Rodgers' number 1 pick to come here, and I think he was as responsible, or his lack of play was as responsible as anything as far as the offense being as bad as it was. So those are my 3 biggest disappointments. I'm sure you guys can touch on a lot more, but for me, those are the 3 that had the biggest magnitude.
Yeah.
I would, hard to disagree. Also hard to limit it to just 3 players when you're talking about this particular season. For the sake of mixing it up, I'll go Dalvin Cook as number 3. I mean, you talked about all the hype around this guy coming into the season. He had a friggin' Hard Knocks episode, basically around him, the Jets fans chanting his name when he hadn't even signed yet. Little did we know that we would get he would make such a little impact this season. Now, I will say that towards the end of the year, I actually do feel like you could see a little spark. Legs looked fresh. And I felt like a competent coaching staff could have used him appropriately, and he could have made an impact. I'm calling it now. You're going to see that he's going to make an impact in the playoffs for the Ravens, despite being on the team for a week now. Mm-hmm. But considering what they signed him for, top 10 running back money in the league, to get, I don't even think 100 carries from him, abysmal production, terrible signing. From there, I'll go CJ Uzomah. Another guy who I think they overvalued, they overhyped, had a pretty good season, if you want to call it that, for the Bengals the year before they signed him. Last year, I think he was serviceable. And then coming into this year, was awful, especially when you consider they had a young, second or third round draft pick and Jeremy Ruckert sitting behind him. Why not give a guy like Ruckert more playing time early on and see what you have. The guy absolutely killed us with penalties. I mean, in my opinion, he single-handedly lost us that Raiders game in which the season just took a turn for the worst. Number one, man, I don't know how it's possible to go anyone other than Lazard. I'd rather switch it up, but I really don't see how you can sugarcoat it. The guy gave us absolutely nothing. I don't think I've ever seen a player drop as many passes as he did in the few games that he even played. I also think back to some pretty big penalties. One that I don't necessarily agree with, didn't think it was his fault, but if you look back to, I think it was the Chiefs game, Monday Night Football, big play on the second to last drive of the game, I believe, and he got called for clipping. And it's kind of one of those, it was ticky-tacky. Again, I don't think it should have been called, but at the same time, as a player, in my opinion, I think it was one of those where you got to be smarter than that. And we saw a lot of those from him throughout the year. Also, general attitude, I was not impressed with. Just kind of seemed like very meh and didn't really seem extremely enthused to be here. So I'll go with those three.
Yeah. I mean, any combination of three players can kind of work in this situation. And my honorable mention was going to be CJ Uzomah. I mean, the guy really hasn't made anywhat of a difference since joining the Jets. Penalties, drops, timely, but let's not forget, I believe he had a drop in the Raiders game he dropped a touchdown in the Raiders game. If he catches that ball, the season's completely different. They move to 4-4 at that point. They're in the driver's seat. They control their own destiny. After that 3-game stretch of the Giants, the Chargers, and the Raiders, any Jets fan that has half a brain knew what was going to happen. So my honorable mention was Uzomah. But number 3, I'm kind of surprised neither of you mentioned his name. Kind of been giving him the benefit of the doubt personally because the guy's finally played and stayed healthy somewhat for a season, but that's Mekhi Becton. Let's not forget we spent the number 11 overall pick on this guy. The guy's a mountain. His nickname is Mount Becton. Well, this guy didn't make any difference in the run game. Pass blocking, I want to say he ended the season as one of the worst graded pass blockers in all of football. I mean, he's got this personal relationship with Rodgers now. He's obviously got a relationship with Saleh and Douglas, and they want to salvage whatever they can out of this guy, but it's not the case. I think that anything for Becton and the Jets moving forward, especially the season coming up, needs to be limited to a 1-year deal. This guy's got to prove that he is more than just a swing tackle, and we're banking on a guy. And like I said, I give credit where credit is due. He finally stayed healthy, and he finally was able to compete for an entire season. But guess what? He was pretty bad. On a regular basis, he was pretty bad. The entire offensive line could kind of deserve a pass if you want to go with the Jets method because of injuries and go with it because of situational things that happen. But Mekhi Becton, former 11th overall pick, this guy was supposed to be a cornerstone tackle, and now we're in 2024. And not only are we looking that we need a franchise tackle, but we probably need 2 of them, and then we need to sign 1 more just in case something else happens. So that's number 3, Mekhi Becton. Number 2 and number 1 could kind of go in with each other, but I'll limit number 2 to Dalvin Cook. Quicksand Cook. I do agree his feet, his legs did seem to come alive later on in the season, but at that point, it was done. From what I hear, the reports of him being a great teammate in the locker room, that is awesome. But when it comes to on-field production, this is a guy that for weeks, Twitter fans clamoring for him to join the team, to be that back, that bridged Breece Hall not being 100% healthy to Breece Hall being healthy. And that was his expectation, and he failed. Breece Hall, it took, I'd say, 6 to 8 weeks for Breece to start looking like Breece. And in those 6 to 8 weeks, we got absolutely zero production from any running back. No, Michael Carter, now Arizona Cardinal. Izzy Abakanda barely got any snaps. It was really solely reliant on Dalvin Cook to help share this load while Hall continued to progress from his rehab, and he failed. Will he go to Baltimore? Will he score a touchdown next weekend? Absolutely. That's just the fact what's going to happen. The guy's going to probably be limited to 10 to 12 touches, and he's going to be able to make the most out of it. So It comes to Dalvin Cook, poor pass protection, never made any difference in the passing game from a receiving standpoint, and then from a running standpoint, from a rushing standpoint, called him Quicksand Cook for a reason. The first 8 weeks of the season, if you got 3 yards out of him, you started to look, maybe we got something here because of how bad he was. And number one, the reason I kind of wanted to tie Dalvin Cook, I left Dalvin Cook out of this because he isn't a former Packer. But you've heard of the Brady Bunch. I can't limit number one to just one player. It's the Rodgers Bunch. You're talking about Allen Lazard, Billy Turner, Adrian Amos. Need I keep going? How many other guys did we bring in? Randall Cobb. Thanks. I knew I was forgetting one big one.
Billy Turner.
You got Billy Turner, Randall Cobb, Adrian Amos, Allen Lazard. I mean, go down the board. Every single guy that followed Rodgers in signing because of this reputation that of a teammate that Rodgers has, and you got guys coming to play for him. Absolutely abysmal. In fact, Allen Lazard might have been the most productive one out of all of those guys I just named, and he was awful. He was a healthy scratch for what? The last 2 to 3 seasons. The Jets are better with Allen Lazard on the sideline paying him $44 million not to play than him taking the field. You got the drops in the Kansas City game. That was, that was a game the Jets should have and could have won. Kind of comes down to not only the officiating, which we ranted on a lot during that week, but Allen Lazard played horrendous. I want to say, other than the touchdown he had 2-3 drops in the second half, multiple penalties that set the Jets back all year. And then I think Twitter gave Billy Turner the nickname of Billy Turnstiles. The guy couldn't block anything. Let's not forget Adrian Amos didn't even end the season on the Jets. All these guys that the Jets brought in, Dalvin Cook even, had him at number 2, didn't finish the season with the Jets. They were so unproductive that they couldn't even make it 16, 17 full weeks. So that's my 3, Becton, Cook, and not the Brady's bunch, but the Rodgers bunch, completely abysmal.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, with the Jets, you could have probably thrown in Zach Wilson there too. You could throw in Hardman. As far as disappointments go, you could probably come up with at least a dozen. But let's talk a little about 3 players that were positive, that were surprises. And I'm actually changing my 3. I was going to go number 3 with Jermaine Johnson because he really did come on this year, but he was a first-round pick. He wasn't terrible last year. He was okay. So I've taken him out of the mix, and my number 3 is going to be Ashton Davis. Let's think of this guy. We wanted this guy cut for the last 2 years. He couldn't be on the field on defense because it looked like he was a deer running around in the headlights. He just was always out of position, didn't know where he needed to be. He's starting to get more reps now. He still didn't get as many reps as I'd like to see, but I was reading something in terms of the amount of snaps he got and the turnovers in which he generated. I forget, it was like every 5 snaps that he was on the field, he generated a turnover, either a pick or a fumble. That last game he generated one. I don't like the fact he tried to pitch that ball there. I don't know why he did that. That was stupid. But given where this guy was and where he is now, and he's always been good to on special teams, and now I'm at a point where I hope that we finally got this guy playing good. I hope he doesn't leave and go to another team. And he came from out of nowhere because I couldn't figure out. I figured he had dirty pictures of one of the coaches because I couldn't figure out why this guy still had a job on the team. And as it turned out, I'm glad we kept him. He's one of the few guys that have actually seemed to be developed. So number 3, as far as a positive goes, I'm going to go with Ashton Davis. Then as far as number 2 goes, and this might be surprising because he's a great player anyways, but I had to go with Breece Hall. We know, look at where this guy came from. You look at what happened with Saquon Barkley when he was injured. People thought he was done. The first year he came back, he couldn't generate anything. And with an offense as bad as we have, as inept as we were offensively, as bad as our quarterbacks were, at the end of the day, he ran for 97 yards. I think he had at least another 500 yards receiving. He had over 1,500 total yards on a team that might be the worst NFL offense of all time, certainly of this century right now. And so for him to put up those numbers after the injury, which took place almost in mid-season last year, not early on, in mid-season, so only really to have a half a season of recovery, and to come back and put up the numbers that he did with that injury, with this offense, I had to put him in there as number 2. I couldn't leave him out. And then number one, this could be surprising as well, but I went with Joe Tipman. And again, this guy's a round two draft pick. And granted, that's pretty high, but the expectations were he was going to be a backup this year. He got thrown in, kind of as a surprise. And if you look at the PFF grades and overall, this guy rated out not only by far as the highest Jet offensive line, but right up there at the top at guards. And he can play guard and center. And where would we be if we didn't have this guy on our team right now? So, given the expectations this year and given how bad our offensive line is, I'd had to go with Joe Tipman, number one, because he was the only saving grace whatsoever on that offense. And without him, who knows how many other quarterbacks would have been killed this year. Yeah. So that's my three positives going as far as this past season goes.
I'm actually I'm going to go, I've got a 3A, 3B, but mainly because they play the same position. And that's Quentin Jefferson and Solomon Thomas. Solomon Thomas was pretty abysmal last year, former, top 10 draft pick, very much been written off in his career. By no means do I think he's a pro baller or even a starter caliber player, but I thought he filled in very nicely. I thought he did a commendable job, did a really good job, I think, of just being playing to his role. Playing alongside Quentin Jefferson, Al Woods. I felt like they did do a good job early in the season, rotating those guys, plugging and playing them in the appropriate, scenarios. And then again, Quentin Jefferson. This is a guy that I think Jets fans were actually pretty hyped about coming into the season. Definitely not to the extent of which he played. The guy put up 6 sacks before getting injured. Maybe a little bit more than halfway through the season. At one point, he was leading the team in sacks. He was in the backfield every game. So I've got to shout those guys out. I've also got to shout out Solomon Thomas for just like the man and person that he is. I see a lot of stuff off the field that he does for the community. Does genuinely seem like a very good person. My number two, I almost am reluctant to put him on this list, but I feel like he elevated his game so much this year that we have to recognize him. That's Quincy Williams. This is a guy that I was actually very excited about coming into this season. I thought last year in particular, he looked phenomenal. Since day one as a Jet, he's been an absolute missile all over the field, flies around. The speed that he provides on the defense, I think, is next level. But this year, he really, polished his game. And a lot of the mistakes that we saw in previous seasons, such as dumb penalties, over pursuing tackles, he cleaned that up. I personally can't remember a single instance where he screwed the Jets this year. I do think there was maybe a tough penalty kind of early on in the season with a critical game where it was, basically playing overly aggressive. But honestly, I'll take that. I'll take that over the opposite any day of the week. My number one surprise, you mentioned that, is Ashton Davis. That the guy had huge numbers for the team this year. Had big numbers for the team last year in very limited action, but also, that came with a consequence. This year, he was on the field. It seemed like he was always making a big play. I know from a PFF perspective, if you got all the analytics and whatnot, he scored extremely highly in a lot of games. I think this is a guy that you have to bring back on a 1 or 2 year deal, small deal at that. I think, continuing to develop your homegrown players. I'm sure I hope that he probably looks at the Jets as his home, someone who's kind of, stuck with him through some of the ups and downs and can maybe mold him into being a good player. If there's one thing that we can say about Rob Saleh and this defense, they have done a good job developing their defensive players. So I got to go Ashton Davis. I would not be shocked if we could see, trajectory kind of similar to Quincy Williams. By no means am I going to say that he's going to be an all-pro or Pro Bowl caliber, because I do think at this point Quincy is that. But I would not be surprised to see maybe in the next 2 years Ashton being a serviceable starter in this league. Lastly, going to make this quick. I want to go back to your comments about Mekhi Becton. I actually kind of considered him for my surprises. If you would have asked me if I thought he could even stay healthy, let alone be serviceable at times, I would have said absolutely not. I would have took it to the bank that he was going to make it no more than halfway through the season. When we saw him hurt his ankle, I figured 100% without a doubt he was done for the year. And honestly, I thought up until that point, he did a very good job. People forget he flip-flopped from right tackle, left tackle for weeks. He single-handedly in the run game in particular did really good early on in the season. And personally, I actually think a lot of that is on the coaching staff. And I also would like to think that, some of the dip in production later on was due to injuries. Do I think that they should take a risk on him and think that, he could be a reliable starter? No. Do I think they could or should bring him back on a 1-year prove-it deal while bringing back a first rounder or high-level starter opposite of him? I'd be willing to take a chance on that if that meant getting a guy like Brock Bowers, Malik Neighbors, who, others we'll talk about later on. So I just wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I look at it as him being, healthy is the expectation. That should be the expectation. To be able to contribute at all should be the expectation. But my top three, I'll go real quick. I had 2 honorable mentions, and you guys have both already mentioned them. That's Ashton Davis and Joe Tippmann. I thought I was actually going to kind of sneak the Joe Tippmann in there. So that being a number 1 from Dad, impressive. I kind of went from a surprising / positive. Some of these guys might not be a shocker, but from a positive standpoint, Tippmann, only bright spot on an offensive line that was abysmal. It's nearing that point. I hate to say it because I understand they're both kind of freak injuries where Elijah Vera-Tucker is nearing a point where he's almost missed as many games as Mekhi Becton. That's going to become a conversation here in the near future if we don't start stacking some healthy seasons together. But Joe Tippmann, even when he faced his health issues this year, it seemed like he never missed more than a week or two. The versatility to go from guard to center, very impressive from a young guy. The future is bright from a standpoint of where his role could be on the Jets team. And then Ashton Davis, kind of like a Geno Smith thing. We wrote him off. Everybody wrote him off. I think all 3 of us did, every Jets fan, most media. And the guy somehow turned into a turnover machine. So that is a ode and a very rare solid comment I'll give. It's a testament to the kind of, their ability to kind of mold these players, especially defensively. I think you're going to see a jump from Tony Adams next year, pretty similar to what we've seen from Ashton Davis. And so props to Ashton Davis for sticking with it. I think he does deserve a second contract. Keep this guy kind of in that role of that 3rd hybrid, 4th hybrid safety, and see where that takes us. Number 3, hasn't been mentioned, had some shaky moments, but Xavier Gipson started the year, finished the year as a punt returner, also was featured more in the receiving game. The offense was so bad that I wouldn't say he's a feature guy or a guy that deserves a lot of looks or a lot of consideration going forward. But there was a moment, I can't remember what game it was, he had that fumble, and was it the Eagles game? He had that fumble, and me and Dad are kind of looking at each other. And Andrew, I know you spoke about it as well, where we're like, here we go. Here come the woes. Here come the Xavier Gipson woes.
Yep.
And while we didn't get the electric touchdowns that we saw in week 1, while we didn't get a lot of the electric plays, we did see an undrafted rookie free agent have a consistent, healthy rookie year and be able to make a difference. He made a whole lot more of a difference than a $44 million guy in Allen Lazard. So Xavier Gipson would be my number 3. And I'm in a situation where I could have meshed these all together. But number 2, I'm going to go special teams. You had Thomas Morstead. You had Greg Zerloin. I don't think anybody's shocked or surprised, but this is the best special teams unit all in all that the Jets have had probably since I've been alive. From a punting standpoint, Steve Weatherford had some really good years as a Jet, but I think Thomas Morstead, from a pure punting perspective, had maybe the most impressive season. He's given number 5 to Garrett Wilson. I hope that means that he's not going anywhere. I know he's up in age. He might want to go home and spend time with his family, but he's got enough in the tank. And then Greg Zerloin, couple shaky things every now and then, but I mean, the guy was pretty consistent when he was lining up for field goals. It wasn't like you're holding your breath from a team that went from Matt Amendola and Kair Vedvik. It was a breath of fresh air having a guy like Greg Zerloin you can count on 4th downs to go in, make a field goal, and whether it was a chip shot or whether it was a 50-plus yarder. I think the Jets, especially like in that Chiefs game and the Raiders game, misutilized Zerloin. I think he has a leg. I think he has the ability to go out, and they opted to either punt or go for it in scenarios where they shouldn't have go for it when they could have easily taken the point. So shout out Thomas Morstead. and shout out Greg Zorloin. And my number one, Andrew, you mentioned it, Quincy Williams. I mean, it's not a surprise because the guy's progressively gotten better, but I think it's naive to say this guy wasn't a top 5 linebacker in football. And this is another pickup. I think it was a 6th-round pick to the Jaguars. Everyone talks about his brother. Him and his brother Quinnen both receiving extensions. This is the time when a player, you got paid, do you continue progressing to be better? And he has. Not only has he progressed to be better, him and C.J. Mosley were a tandem, a linebacker group in the middle that were outstanding nonetheless. You know what I mean? This guy was everywhere, was in the pass game, in the run game, as a pass rusher. I think we're watching a player evolve into something that on a year-to-year basis we're going to get similar to an all-pro level. And I think he's getting a little bit of that David Harris treatment. If this guy had a different name, a bigger name, maybe played on a more successful team, he would have been to the Pro Bowl. There's no reason he should have been an alternate. I think the guy will get all-pro consideration. So progressing from a undrafted or a pickup 6th-round guy that got cut by Jacksonville to where he's at now, shout out to Quincy Williams. He's my number one on the season.
There's talent on this team. You know, that's what makes this season so disappointing, is that we had it wasn't a hard time to come up with 3 surprises or positives, and there's a lot more guys you could throw in the mix as well. Just 2 things real quick on things that you guys mentioned. As far as Ashton Davis goes, if he does come back, look for him to possibly fill the role of Jamien Sherwood. They've actually been playing him more in that position, not so much safety, but more of that hybrid linebacker that comes in pass situations. So if they do bring him back, you may see him more in that linebacker spot than at the pure safety, and that will allow Adams and he to be on the field at the same time. And with Becton, I know everyone's kind of written him off as far as he's gone, but I saw something interesting. I saw a rating of the tackles that are going to be free agents this year, and several had Mekhi Becton right now ranked 3rd. It's not the most impressive list, and I don't really know much about these guys. I can't remember the other names to begin with, but Mekhi Becton right now is ranked 3rd on the list of top 10 tackles coming out in free agency. So don't be surprised if maybe they work something out. If he's willing to come back on a prove-it deal, they may decide, you know what, let's ride with the guy. He had a healthy year. Maybe next year he takes it up a notch. But what I'm saying is there's not a lot to choose from right there, and you can't rely on the fact that you're going to bring in 2 starting tackles in the draft. So I think as time goes on, I think the certainty that Mekhi Becton not coming back may change. And when I thought that was quite eye-opening when I looked at the list, and he's number 3 there. So something to think about. Anyways, as we start to close this down now, I thought we'd kind of look towards next year a little bit, maybe make some early predictions. I know you guys follow the draft in college more than I do, so I'll leave most of that up to you. But I was looking at my prediction for next year. I think the Jets will definitely be better next year. I think Aaron Rodgers will be back. He'll play the full season. He may miss games here and there, and that's why it's imperative to bring in a veteran backup quarterback. But I've got a positive to it, and I got a negative to my prediction. My positive is the Jets are going to have a winning record next year. For the first time since 2015, they will have a winning record. They're actually going to win 10 games. They're going to go 10-7. They're going to play meaningful football games right up to the last game of the season. But the negative is, guess what, guys? They're not making the playoffs. And it's more about the other teams in the division. I'll just going to give you the AFC East and North, okay? Miami and Buffalo. They're not going to be better than either one of them. I'm sorry. They're both making the playoffs. One wins the division, one's the wild card. Then go to the North. You've got Burrow coming back with the Bengals, who are already won 9 games without him. You got Burrow. You've got the Ravens, and then you've got Cleveland, who made the playoffs without Deshaun Watson. I'd even mention Pittsburgh. I can go to the other divisions and talk about Houston and Jacksonville. So the Jets will be right there. I believe they're probably going to lose out on a tiebreaker or be that last team not to make it. Things can change with free agency and the draft, but just based on what I've seen from our general manager, who, by the way, is 27-56, and our coaching, I can't pick the Jets over any of those teams right now. So they'll have a winning record, but based on all the talent on those other teams I just mentioned, and I don't know if any of those teams losing anybody, I just don't see the Jets making the playoffs. It's going to be logjam, and they're going to be on the outside looking in next year. So that's my prediction.
I mean, wouldn't that be so Jet like we finally have a winning season since 2015 and missed the playoffs. And when I hadn't thought about that, when you put it into perspective, it's, it's could very easily see it happening. Reasons for optimism and I guess, things to look ahead to. I will say, if we can give this staff credit for anything, it is the defense. I am concerned about Ulbrich getting consideration for head coaching opportunities. That said, with the way that the league has shifted to such an offensive league, I still think, as good as the defense has been, he's going to be lower on the totem pole. This may be his last season with the Jets as defensive coordinator, assuming they can put up, a third season of top 10 performance. I think as long as that defensive staff and our young playmakers are in place, I think you're always looking at this Jets defense being top 10, top 15. Let's see, as far as the off season and things to look forward to, I will point out something that I find ironic that not a lot of people are paying attention to or bringing attention to is this is Joe Douglas's final year of his contract. He's going into year 6 of a 6-year deal. Crazy to think that how quickly time has flown by. He was supposed to be the savior coming in. The first, I would say, 3 years of the rebuild, he looked just like that. You look at the Jamal Adams deal, others, and I will say I put this season just as much on him, maybe if not more, than the coaching staff. Now, with that said, think about it. If you've got a head coach and a GM, both who have to know they're on the hot seat, their success is tied to Aaron Rodgers, protecting Aaron Rodgers and giving him weapons. The defense is pretty set. I could see this offseason being somewhat reminiscent of 2015 or even like 2010, 2011, where they bring in some pretty big time veteran additions. I think they have to. They have no choice. You're basically out and you're handing the keys off to someone else. So what do they have to lose? That said, my concern is, what draft capital do they really have? I mean, unless they want to trade future draft picks, which again, why would they care? Because it's like, if they don't win, don't perform, they're not going to be here to use those draft picks anyway. So I could see, a big splash trade, couple free agency additions. I think they absolutely 100% have to go out and get either a 1B or a very high end number 2 receiver. Name that's kind of flying under the radar that I actually think is fairly realistic is a guy like Calvin Ridley. Mike Evans, don't think he's going anywhere. Devontae Adams, don't think he's going anywhere. And quite frankly, I don't want to give up the draft capital to get him as much as he would bring to this team. Michael Pittman, I think, would be a perfect addition. Fringe 1,000-yard receiver, big body type, can go up and catch passes, take a lot of attention off of Garrett Wilson. I just don't see how a team like the Colts, who just invested a top 5 pick in a quarterback, are going to let it go, walk away like that and have to refill that need. So a realistic option in my eyes that I think could be very valuable in this situation would be Calvin Ridley. In my opinion, we don't need another number 1. We need a 1B or a high-end number 2. T. Higgins would be great. He's shown that he could be a great number 2 option. I see him commanding really, really top dollar money. That I think, the Jets will look at how can we more evenly distribute our resources. And I think that's a path they could go down. And then you mentioned offensive line. Absolutely 100% have to bring in a starter in free agency. You can't bank on bringing in a starter via the draft. I do think that will ultimately happen. But regardless, you're looking at likely needing to bring in 2 offensive linemen. I'm going to go with a bold prediction that we're actually going to see Laken Tomlinson released Laken Tomlinson released, and that they could even bring in a new guard. Outside of that, Brees is an absolute monster. I saw a stat that in the last, I want to say 15, 20 years, there's only been one running back who has basically come back and scored in like the top, I think, 10 of fantasy running backs. And we're talking about fantasy football, not real football here. And Breece Hall is that one running back. So he's shown that he's basically an alien. He's gonna come back and be that much better next year, especially with all the attention coming off of him. And then one position that I'm very torn on, this is probably the last thing I'll say, is tight end. On one hand, I love the idea as a Georgia fan of bringing in a guy like Brock Bowers with that top 10 pick. No guarantee he's even going to be there. I could see him going to a team like the Chargers. On one hand, I'm like, man, how cool would it be to bring in another, high-level pass catcher, which we've already acknowledged we need, and bring in, for me, but at the same token, again, you look at, how they can best allocate resources. Conklin had a sneaky good year. He had just under 700 yards receiving. I think he tied his career best in receptions with 61. He's a very solid number 3 option. I think, again, if you can bring in a 1B receiver, a number 2 receiver, you can count as Conklin possibly even stepping his game up that much more, because we know how much Rodgers likes to use his tight ends. And then you did just invest a 2nd-round pick or a 3rd-round pick, I believe, in Jeremy Ruckert. So, when I look at how to best allocate those resources, I kind of see that being a better option. And so ideally, I think I would love to see them maybe go tackle or wide receiver with those first 2 picks, or, reverse depending on how free agency goes. And then I also actually think, last thing here, is that despite all that, despite drafting a guy, despite maybe signing a 1B or a number 2, you have to bring in another solid veteran wide receiver. You can't count on Lazard for anything, in my opinion. The coach basically openly said he's here for 1 more year, despite having a 4-year contract. Maybe that was just, not understanding of the deal. Who knows? I just don't see how you can go into the season counting on Lazard as your number 3 option. Maybe Jason Brownlee could step up. I actually thought he made some pretty nice looking flash plays towards the end. Would have liked to see a little bit more for him. So that will be interesting. But those are some of my kind of key areas that I'm looking forward to. And I think they really need to obviously, focus on.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. We're facing the wall, but the fact of the matter is Aaron Rodgers is our 2nd-round pick this year. So we're going to need the investment of the money and the draft capital for that to pan out. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting right where we are next year. So we need Rodgers to come in, to be healthy, and to be everything is listed. That's the big thing for next year. The Jets don't even know how to tank right. The best overall tackle prospect ever, in my opinion, is coming out. Joe Alt, he'll be a top 5 pick. All the Jets had to do was lose a meaningless game to the Patriots, or lose a meaningless game to the Commanders, or lose a meaningless game at any point in the last month of the year. But they're gonna that's not going to be the case. They're at 10. We're in Mekhi Becton territory when it comes to an offensive line. I hate to say it. Whatever tackle prospect we end up with, whether it's the guy from Oregon State, we're not getting Alt, and we're not getting Olashandu, whatever his name is, from Penn State. And those are the 2 clear-cut 1A, 1B. Whatever guy we get isn't going to be an all-pro level. Protection is going to be a problem next year, whether we like it or not, from a free agency standpoint. Look at the pickups we've had over the years: Billy Turner, Laken Tomlinson, some of the guys on the outside. I think it's safe to say that Joe Douglas has we've over-evaluated Joe Douglas's ability to evaluate offensive linemen. He's been trying to do this for 5 years now, and it's progressively gotten worse and worse. His opening statement at his opening press conference was, "We're going to build from the inside." And while the defense is great, I kind of owe that a lot to Robert Saleh. This offensive line has been terrible, and likely will continue to struggle. The draft capital's not there. The cap money is not there. This team needs to kind of hit on a couple spots, and then they put all their eggs in the basket on Aaron Rodgers, and that is the reality of it. It's Rodgers is going to perform at an MVP level, or we're not going to succeed. When you talk about the number 10 pick, I love Brock Bowers. I think the guy's going to be best college tight end of all time. I think he's got a chance to make that same impact at the NFL level. That being said, how can a team with as many holes on the offensive line, receivers, and even some, that back end of the defense in the secondary with the safeties, justify picking a tight end in the top 10? We've seen Kyle Pitts not pan out. The proof is in the pudding. I think Brock Bowers would be a great player. I just don't see it working out. Number 10, you got Rome Odunze out of Washington, Malik Neighbors, a couple guys outside. I think are more realistic options than adding a Michael Pittman, than adding a Mike Evans. I would love Pittman. I think he'd fit in this offense. What system, I don't know, but he's a talented player. He's going to be able to contribute. So that would be I would prefer him over Davante Adams, just because of the age and the money that he'd be demanding. That being said, I do think Davante Adams is a realistic addition. I think that is going to happen. Like I said, Rodgers, this is boom or bust. These guys are going to go all in on this year, because 2025 is not going to matter for about 75% of the guys in that building if the Jets don't make the playoffs next year. It's not going to matter. You can go down from the coaching to the general manager to the quarterback, outside of maybe Breece Hall, Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Joe Tippmann, some of these young guys they've had drafted in the last couple of years. It's not 2025 on is not going to matter. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some future draft capital moved, whether it's 2025 or 2026, to get a guy like Adams, to maybe get a guy like Evans or Pittman. It's going to come. You're right about this offseason, 2011, 2015. This is going to be the offseason. But you got to tamper your expectations, because unless Aaron Rodgers performs at an MVP level, this team is not going to win anything. I'm so down on the coaching staff. I'm really down on Joe Douglas. Dad, you mentioned a 27-52 record. We were thinking about building a statue out of this guy. A year of time, there might be a angry mob outside of MetLife trying to get this guy out of his job. So that'll be my final comment. The Jets have a long way to go. All the chips, all the eggs are in on Aaron Rodgers, and unless that pans out, this team's not.
One thing I want to mention real quick before we go that you guys had mentioned is backup quarterback. The good news is there's some really good backup quarterbacks. The three top that I saw that are legit backups are Tyrod Taylor, Gardner Minshew, and Jacoby Brissett. The problem is I don't think we're going to get any one of those three, because they're good enough to where I think they're going to want to come into a camp with the opportunity to compete for a starting job. And knowing that Aaron Rodgers is going to be there next year and has already said he wants to play beyond next year, I don't think we're going to sign any one of those three unless the Jets are willing to pay them top-notch starting quarterback salary. So any one of those three would be great, but I don't think any one of them are going to come to the Jets. I think we're going to end up looking at guys like Tannehill or Darnold, or maybe we bring back Flacco again. So there is a pool, but I just don't think they're going to be interested in this situation with the Jets. Yeah. And I hate to burst everybody's bubble, but as receiver, to me, the Jet-like move, and I'm already starting to hear rumors, is OBJ back to the Jets next year, because he's Aaron's guy. It was close to happening this year. He's a me type of player, and even though he's tasted success with the Ravens, he's only got 35 receptions, and he didn't start. And I could see them promising him the number 2 receiver spot and starting, give him a good salary, and I wouldn't be shocked if the receiver we're talking about is OBJ. And I'll close with that.
I hope that's not the case.
I'll make one.
I hope so too, but
2 minutes, Andrew.
So going back to, you've obviously got Joe Alt and Olushanu are clearly your 1A, 1B tackles. An idea that I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to if the Jets feel that there's a significant drop-off. This is a deep line class at tackle in particular. We're probably going to see like 6 to, I think they're saying 6 tackles drafted in the first round. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed if they attach themselves to a guy like Amarius Mims at Georgia, or another tackle that they view as a day one starter, just maybe not, at a Pro Bowl level day one. I wouldn't be opposed to trading that number 10 pick down to like the teens or early 20s and recouping a second round pick or better if they feel like that guy is truly, can come in and be successful. That would also really change the dynamics of what you can do, because it's also a deep wide receiver class. So something we'll probably get into a later, podcast, how about draft, free agency, but just wanted to throw that out there, that this is a very deep tackle class.
Yeah, there's a couple options. You mentioned Mims. There's the guy out of Oregon State and Washington. Mm-hmm. Either one of them, I'm not even going to try to pronounce their names. But there's ability. I just think the draft capital, we're going to have to use a lot of 2025 and 2026 to make a difference in 2024. And it's going to be one of those give and take situations, but we're backs against the wall. We aim for 45 minutes, and within what feels like 15 minutes, we're at the 59-minute mark. So we're gonna have to get up out of here. Before we do, I wanted to save at least 20 seconds. Hey, 5-0 since the OG Anunoby trade. Put some respect on the Knicks name. They're coming. They're going to finish top 3 seed. We got to be happy about something. Pitchers and catchers report for the Mets, and what I think like 55 days or something along.
Don't expect much from the Mets this year.
It's pretty sad time in New York sports when the New York Knicks is what you're hanging your hat on. And
Rangers too. Rangers.
So it's nice to have all 3 of us back in the saddle again, talking Jets. I wish we had more than an hour. I wish we could go, on and on. We could probably make this, you know, a 2-3 hour thing if we really wanted to. But guys, we'll be coming back in for some more content soon. The draft, the off season, there's going to be moves that are going to be made, and we'll be there to kind of discuss. Hopefully, we can get all three of us together again. And break it down. So we're in and we're out, guys. We appreciate the feedback. We're going to be trying some different stuff, some Instagram Live. I know StreamYard's kind of adding that in, and then we'll let it roll. So I don't know what these guys are laughing about, but we're gonna wrap it up before we hit that 60-minute mark.